The chill of early evening seeped into the cabin's wooden frame as Nell sat across from Mabel Crane. The air thick with the scent of dried herbs and old paper. The flickering candlelight danced over the faded maps and brittle parchments strewn across the table between them. Nell's fingers trembled slightly as she traced the jagged lines of an ancient map, her eyes darting between the symbols and the weathered journal pages she had painstakingly collected over the past weeks. Mabel's voice, low and steady, filled the cramped room. "The Jersey Devil," Mabel began, her piercing eyes reflecting the candle's flame, "isn't what most believe it to be, not truly." Nell leaned forward, curiosity sharpening her features. "Then what is it, exactly?" Mabel's gaze drifted toward the window, where the darkening pines swayed like silent sentinels. A story, a veil, a mask that hides something far older and far darker. The primordial shade. Nell's breath hitched. She had heard whispers of this entity before, an amorphous shadow lurking in the forest's depths, eyes burning like dying coal's butt. Never had she connected it directly with the Jersey Devil myth. It was always a tale told to frighten children or explain disappearances in a way that kept them from looking too closely. "Why hide it behind the Jersey Devil?" Nell asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because the shade is ancient, older than any recorded history here. The Jersey Devil is a legend born from fear, yes, but it's also a story crafted to keep the townsfolk's eyes off the true evil," Mabel explained, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. "People fear what they can name, what they can tell stories about. The shade feeds on fear, but it also thrives in the unknown. The legend is a shield, fragile but effective for now." The room seemed to close in around Nell, the weight of Mabel's words settling deep in her chest. She thought of her brother, Tommy, lost to the forest's shadows, and the countless others who had vanished without trace. How many had truly fallen to the Jersey Devil, and how many to something far worse? Later that evening, Nell met with Deputy Marcus Flynn and Jonas Reed at the forest's edge. The fading light cast long, sinister shadows beneath the towering pines. The three moved silently among the undergrowth, their flashlights casting narrow beams over moss-covered stones marked with strange carvings. Jonas knelt beside one, brushing away leaves to reveal symbols ancient and worn. "The stories Jonas told," Nell murmured, "they weren't just tall tales, they were warnings." Marcus grunted, his skepticism wavering as he studied the carvings. "I've patrolled these woods my whole life and never noticed this. It's like the forest itself is trying to tell us something." A distant owl's call echoed through the trees, a haunting reminder of the wilderness's watchful presence. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. Nell felt the forest pulse with a life of its own, alive with menace and secrets. Back in town, Nell spent hours in the cramped local library, poring over yellowed newspaper clippings, folklore collections, and archived police reports. Her fingers traced a timeline of disappearances, each linked by subtle threads of myth and half-truths. The Jersey Devil was a constant presence in the stories, but the inconsistencies and contradictions hinted at a deeper, more terrifying reality. As the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, Nell's mind raced. The legend had been a convenient scapegoat, a story to explain the unexplainable, but the truth was far more sinister. Her final confrontation that night came at the boundary where town met forest. Marcus stood beside her, his usual gruff demeanor softened by dawning belief. The mist curled at their feet, swirling like living smoke. Nell presented her findings, her voice steady despite the cold gnawing at her bones. "The Jersey Devil was never the real threat," she said. "It was a story to keep us from looking too deep. But the primordial shade, it's real, and it's waking. Marcus's eyes narrowed, scanning the dark tree line. If that's true, what do we do now? Before Nell could answer, a low, shifting shadow flickered at the forest's edge, its coal-like eyes burning with ancient malevolence. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Nell swallowed hard, the line between myth and reality blurring into a chilling certainty. The true horror lurking beneath the Pine Barrens was no longer just a story. It was a living nightmare awakening, and it was coming for them all. The night deepened, wrapping the town in a silence that thrummed with unseen danger. Nell's resolve hardened. The mask had been lifted, but the battle was only just beginning. "We need to prepare," she whispered, eyes fixed on the dark forest beyond, because the Jersey Devil was never the enemy. And with that, the shadows shifted once more, whispering secrets that no one should hear, secrets that promised a reckoning long overdue. As Nell turned away, the forest seemed to lean closer, its ancient breath cold against her skin. The primordial shade was no longer content to hide in the dark. It was ready to claim its dominion. The whispers never truly end. The forest around Eleanor Nell Hayes seemed to breathe, not with the gentle sighs of wind through the leaves, but with a heavy, suffocating pulse that pressed against her lungs and sank into her bones. Dusk had fallen hours ago, but the twilight lingered unnaturally, casting long, writhing shadows that slithered across the underbrush like living things. Nell's footsteps faltered as the shapes morphed, limbs of branches twisting into grotesque fingers, faces melting from bark, eyes glinting with malevolent amusement. Her breath came ragged, each inhale sharp and shallow, as if the forest itself sought to deny her air. "Nell," the whisper was soft, barely more than a tremor in the dark, yet it echoed in her mind like a scream. She spun, heart pounding, searching for the source, but the trees stood silent, stoic sentinels cloaked in shadow. The voice came again, clearer this time, but no one was there. It was her brother's name, spoken with a tenderness that twisted her heart. She shook her head, trying to dislodge the creeping panic. "Get a grip," she muttered to herself, voice cracking. "This isn't real. It's just your mind playing tricks." The forest had been a puzzle, a mystery to solve. But now it was a prison, the walls closing in with every step she took deeper into the darkness. Her journal, once a source of clarity, had become a mocking mirror. She sat beside a gnarled root and opened it, the pages trembling in her hands. But the words, her carefully noted clues and observations, began to shimmer and warp. Letters bled into one another, sentences twisting into taunts. "You can't save him," the ink seemed to say. Nell slammed the book shut, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. The weight of guilt for Tommy's disappearance pressed down like a physical force, and the forest fed on it, growing stronger with her despair. A sudden chill swept through the clearing, and the moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting silvery beams that danced like phantoms. In the shifting light, a figure coalesced, pale, translucent, and impossibly familiar. Tommy stood there, his eyes hollow yet pleading, fingers outstretched as if to reach for her. "Tommy," her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with hope and fear. The apparition flickered, wavering between the living and the dead. It beckoned her forward into the thickening woods. "Come," the vision urged, voice like the rustle of dead leaves. Nell rose unsteadily, drawn by an irresistible pull that defied reason. Every step deeper into the forest blurred the lines between nightmare and waking life. The trees whispered secrets in a language older than time, and shadows slithered at the edges of her vision. Suddenly, a hand gripped her arm, rough and urgent. She gasped, turning to see Deputy Marcus Flynn's weathered face, etched with concern. "Nell, you've got to stop this. You're not well." Her eyes flickered with confusion and desperation. "I have to find him, Marcus. He's here. I can feel it." Marcus shook his head. "This forest is getting to you. It's getting to all of us." He steadied her as she swayed, his grip firm but gentle. "You're slipping," he said quietly. "If you don't fight back, the forest will take you too." Nell's mind screamed in defiance, but exhaustion and fear gnawed at her resolve. The primordial shade's influence was a dark tide, washing away her certainty and leaving only shadows. Inside the small cabin she had claimed as a refuge, the walls seemed to close in. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shapes that mocked her solitude. She pored over her notes again, desperate to find a thread of truth in the chaos. But the words blurred and shifted, mocking her efforts, as if the forest itself conspired to keep its secrets locked away. She whispered to herself, piecing together fragments of ancient rites and warnings gleaned from Mabel Crane's cryptic tales. Yet each revelation was swallowed by mounting hallucinations, voices calling from the trees, visions of twisted faces leering from the darkness, the faint echo of Tommy's laughter turning into a scream. The line between reality and nightmare thinned until it vanished entirely. Nell found herself standing alone in the forest at midnight, the cold seeping through her clothes, breath visible in the frigid air. The primordial shade stirred, a shifting mass of coal-black shadow with eyes that burned like embers. It loomed just beyond sight, a presence felt more than seen, its hunger palpable. "You cannot run," it seemed to say through the rustling leaves. Panic surged, and Nell stumbled backward, heart hammering. The forest closed around her, whispering secrets too terrible to understand. Her mind fractured, a kaleidoscope of fear and despair. The scream that tore from her throat was swallowed by the darkness. As dawn approached, Marcus found her collapsed beside a twisted tree, skin pale and lips blue. Her hands trembled as she tried to speak, eyes wild and unfocused. "Nell, stay with me," Marcus urged, his voice thick with desperation. But the shadows lingered in her gaze, the whispers echoing in her mind. The forest had claimed a part of her, a part that might never return. Yet beneath the madness, a flicker of determination remained, fragile but unyielding. She had to fight, not only for her sanity, but for the truth buried beneath the pines. The ancient evil was awakening, and if she succumbed, it would win. The battle for her mind had only just begun. The forest waited, patient and eternal, its whispers never ending. The forest around them seemed to breathe with a sinister life of its own. Nell's boot sank slightly into the soft, mossy earth as she stepped cautiously into the clearing, the oppressive darkness folding around her like a thick shroud. Every sound, the crack of a twig, the rustle of leaves, was magnified in the stillness. The air was heavy, carrying the sharp scent of damp decay and something more intangible, like the weight of ancient sorrow and anger. Ahead, the shadows began to coalesce, swirling and writhing until an amorphous figure emerged. The primordial shade, as Mabel had called it, revealed itself in full, terrifying form. Its shifting shape absorbed the faint light, becoming a living void, but its eyes burned bright and unyielding, two coals glowing with malevolent intelligence. The creature's presence was a crushing force, pressing down on Nell's chest, and she fought the instinct to flee, steadying her breath. Behind her, Mabel's voice rose in a low chant, weaving words older than memory. Her thin fingers traced glyphs in the air and on the ground, the symbols glowing faintly with a spectral light. Nell knelt beside her, drawing the ancient ritual symbols they had painstakingly prepared. Her hands trembled not with fear, but with the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. This was no longer a story or legend. This was a battle for survival and sanity. Marcus stood nearby, his weathered face taut with tension, eyes darting between the creature and the protective circle they formed. He clutched a flare gun tightly, a last line of defense in a world where conventional weapons seemed meaningless. When the shade lurched forward, its shadowy tendrils reaching like claws, Marcus fired the flare into the sky. The sudden burst of brilliant light exploded overhead, scattering the darkness with a shower of red sparks and forcing the creature to recoil. But the victory was fleeting. The shade's form rippled, reforming with sinister grace, and the forest seemed to pulse around them, trees bending slightly, shadows deepening, whispering voices threading through the night air. Nell felt the creature's ancient malice clawing at her mind, dredging up memories of Tommy, of every lost moment and unanswered question. The whispers were a maddening chorus, threatening to unravel her grip on reality. Summoning every shred of strength, Nell rose, her voice ringing out against the oppressive silence. "You do not belong here," she shouted, the words carrying the power of defiance and hope. The ritual symbols flared brightly beneath her feet, a barrier against the encroaching darkness. The shade shrieked, a soundless howl that twisted the air, and for a moment the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Mabel's chanting grew louder, more insistent, and the circle of light expanded, pushing the shadows back. Marcus moved to reinforce their position, his steady presence a grounding force amidst the chaos. Together, the three of them stood firm against a primal terror that had slumbered for centuries. As the night wore on, the battle waged not only in the physical realm but in the depths of their minds and souls. Nell's vision blurred, hallucinations flickering at the edges of her senses. Yet she held fast, the memory of Tamir beacon in the encroaching darkness fueling her resolve. Finally, the primordial shade faltered, its form dissipating into the whispering trees. The oppressive weight lifted slightly, though the forest remained alive with uneasy silence and watchful shadows. Nell sank to her knees, breath ragged but victorious for now. Marcus approached, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "We did it," he said, voice hoarse but steady. Mabel gave a solemn nod, her eyes reflecting both relief and lingering wariness. But Nell knew this was not the end. The ancient evil had been driven back, not destroyed. The forest's whispers would never truly cease, and the line between myth and reality had been forever blurred. As dawn's first light filtered through the canopy, Nell looked out over the pine's silent vast, and watching. A new chapter had begun, one where the stories they told might just hold the key to survival. With a final glance at the fading shadows, Nell whispered, "This is only the beginning." And the forest answered with a whisper that promised it would be waiting. The first light of dawn seeped hesitantly through the thick canopy of the Pine Barrens, casting long, fragile beams that barely penetrated the heavy gloom. Eleanor Nell Hayes stood at the forest's edge, her breath forming pale clouds in the crisp morning air. Around her, the world seemed muted, as if the very forest held its breath after the night's violent upheaval. The ground beneath her boots was damp, scattered with broken twigs and crushed leaves, the silent remnants of a battle fought in shadows and whispered fears. Nell's hands trembled slightly, not from cold but from the residue of fear and adrenaline that clung to her skin like a second layer. Behind her, the town was waking slowly, already abuzz with hushed conversations and the cautious return to an uneasy normalcy. Yet, as she looked back into the forest, the dark heart of the pines seemed to pulse quietly, alive with secrets and threats that refused to be silenced. She turned away reluctantly, knowing that the day ahead held its own challenges. The battle with the primordial shade had ended, or so they hoped, but the scars it left, both seen and unseen, would linger. Nell's footsteps were heavy as she made her way toward the town hall, where Deputy Marcus Flynn and Mabel Crane waited. The trio had become an unlikely coalition, united by shared terror and a fragile trust forged in fire. Inside the town hall, the atmosphere was thick with exhaustion. The walls, once a place of bureaucratic order, now bore the weight of whispered fears and unspoken questions. Marcus leaned against a worn wooden table, his face weathered and drawn, his usual gruff demeanor tempered by a solemn gravity. Mabel sat nearby, her silver hair a stark contrast to the dim room, her eyes sharp despite the wear of age. "We held them off," Marcus said, breaking the silence, voice low but steady. "But it's not over, not really." Mabel nodded, her fingers curling tightly around a small talisman she always carried. The forest breathes still, and so does the darkness beneath it. Nell swallowed hard, the words echoing what she had feared since their confrontation in the cavern. The primordial shade was a force, older and more resilient than any of them had imagined. It wasn't just a creature to be fought and defeated. It was an ancient presence, woven into the very soil and roots of the pines. "We need to warn the others," Nell said, her voice steadier than she felt. "If the shade is still here, if it's watching, then everyone has to be ready." Marcus's eyes flickered with a mixture of relief and frustration. The town's shaken. Some want to leave, others want to forget this ever happened. But fear can be as dangerous as the shade itself. Mabel's gaze pierced them both. "Fear feeds the darkness. We must find balance, or the cycle will begin anew." The conversation was interrupted by a sudden chill that swept through the room, as if the forest itself had exhaled a cold warning. Nell felt a shiver race down her spine, her senses sharpened by months of vigilance. Later, in the solitude of her rented cabin, Nell sat by the window, the forest shadows stretching long and restless beyond the glass. Her journal lay open on the table, pages filled with frantic notes, sketches of symbols, and fragmented thoughts. Yet tonight, she found herself unable to write. Instead, her mind replayed the horrors she had witnessed, the shifting coal-eyed shadow, the whispering trees, the relentless dread that seeped into her bones. Outside, the wind stirred, carrying with it faint murmurs that seemed almost like voices. Nell pressed her palm against the cool glass, a silent plea for peace that felt impossibly distant. Her reflection stared back at her, eyes wide, tired, haunted. The battle had changed her, carved deep lines of fear and determination into her soul. A sudden noise broke the stillness, a rustling among the trees nearby. Nell's heart surged as she stood, moving cautiously toward the door. Outside, Marcus's silhouette emerged from the darkness, his hand resting on the holster at his side. "Did you hear that?" Nell whispered. Marcus nodded grimly. "The pines aren't done with us yet." Together, they moved into the night, senses alert. In the shadows, a pair of coal-red eyes blinked once before vanishing into the blackness. The primordial shade had not been banished. It was waiting, watching, its hunger undiminished. Nell swallowed her fear and squared her shoulders. The forest's whispers would never end. Neither would her fight. As the first rays of sunlight began to pierce the horizon again, Nell knew this was only the beginning of a longer, darker journey, one where the line between myth and reality had forever been blurred, and where the shadows of the Pine Barrens would haunt her dreams and waking hours alike. The echoes of the forest's ancient darkness lingered still. A reminder that some evils never truly sleep, and that some stories never find their final chapter. The town of Pine Hollow gathered beneath the flickering lights of the community center, a drab building that seemed to absorb the weight of unease pressing down upon its walls. The air inside was thick with tension, voices rising and falling like restless winds through the pines outside. Eleanor Nell Hayes stood near the back, her arms folded tightly across her chest, eyes scanning the crowd. Faces she recognized, some etched with worry. Others, hardened by fear or disbelief, turned toward the podium where Sheriff Linda Caraway attempted to maintain order. "We need answers," a voice cut through the murmur. "People are still disappearing. We can't just wait around for stories and legends to save us." Sheriff Caraway's gaze swept the room. "I understand your fear. We're doing everything we can with the resources available. But these disappearances," she faltered, caught between enforcing reason and acknowledging the unspoken dread that gripped her town. Deputy Marcus Flynn stepped forward, his weathered face shadowed with fatigue. "It's not just accidents. Something is out there, something none of us fully understand. But panic won't help. We need to stay united." Murmurs of agreement and dissent clashed in a cacophony of voices. Nell felt the fragile threads of community fraying under the strain of fear and uncertainty. She knew better than anyone the dangers lurking beyond the tree-lined threats, not just of flesh and bone, but of ancient, shadowed power. Later that evening, Nell made her way to Mabel Crane's cabin, the narrow path winding through the thickening forest illuminated only by a waning crescent moon. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. But beneath it lurked something colder, something that made her skin prickle with unease. The trees seemed to lean inward, their branches clawing at the sky as if whispering secrets in a language older than time. Inside, the cabin was warm, lit by the flickering flames of a small hearth. Mabel sat with her hands folded, eyes gleaming in the firelight. "The darkness doesn't sleep," she said softly, voice carrying the weight of generations. "It watches, waits. It feeds on the fear we carry, the stories we tell." Nell nodded, the fragments of her brother Tommy's journal turning over in her mind, his obsession with the Jersey Devil. The strange patterns he had uncovered, the warnings he had ignored. "It's still here," she whispered, "the primordial shade." Mabel's gaze hardened, and it grows stronger. "Every shadow is a breath, every silence a heartbeat. We cannot fight what we do not see, but we must not let it consume us." The following nights brought no respite. Deputy Marcus patrolled the quiet streets, the usual sounds of nocturnal life replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence. His breath came out in shallow puffs, eyes darting to the darkness beyond the street lamps. Every shadow seemed to flicker, to shift with a life of its own. He felt it, a presence just beyond perception, watching, waiting. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as an oppressive chill wrapped around his spine. Back at Nell's temporary home, she sat by the window, journal open on her lap. The whispering wind carried faint voices, indistinct and teasing, as if the forest itself was trying to speak. She traced the patterns in Tommy's notes, searching for a thread to pull, a way to unravel the ancient darkness that clung to the pines. Days blurred into restless nights. The town's wounds remained raw, the disappearances unresolved. Some villagers turned inward, shutting their doors and windows against the encroaching fear. Others sought solace in old legends, lighting candles or leaving offerings at the forest's edge. But the primordial shade was patient. It thrived in the cracks between belief and denial, in the spaces where shadows gathered and hope flickered low. At the heart of it all, Nell felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier with each passing moment. The forest's secrets were far from fully unearthed, and the unseen shadows whispered promises of darker days ahead. As the wind moaned through the pines, carrying with it the faintest hint of a scream, she knew the battle was far from over. The whispers never truly end in the Pine Barrens. They linger, echoing in the minds of those who listen, weaving tales that blur the line between myth and reality, and feeding the ancient darkness waiting just beyond the reach of light. The road stretched out before Eleanor Nell Hayes like a ribbon unraveling into the night. The taillights of her old sedan cutting through the thickening dusk like twin beacons of fragile resolve. Behind her, the Pine Barrens receded into a shadowed silhouette, ancient trees standing like sentinels guarding secrets older than memory itself. The air was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and damp earth, but beneath that familiar forest aroma lurked something more elusive, a whisper, a pulse, a lingering breath of the darkness she had come to know too intimately. She glanced in the rearview mirror, catching the last glimpse of the dense forest canopy melting into the night sky. It was as if the trees themselves exhaled a silent sigh, their shadows stretching long and thin, reaching out like fingers reluctant to relinquish their hold. Nell's hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles pale in the low light. The weight of what she had witnessed, the unnameable horror beneath the pines, the ancient evil that defied all reason pressed down on her chest like lead. Memories flooded her mind, the shifting coal eyes of the primordial shade, the twisting shadows that seemed to throb with malevolent life. Mabel Crane's cryptic warnings, spoken in a voice as dry as the brittle leaves underfoot. The darkness never leaves, Mabel had said, her gaze piercing. It waits, it watches, and it whispers. Nell swallowed hard, the taste of old fear bitter on her tongue. The forest had marked her, altered the very fabric of her being. As much as she tried to leave the pines behind, a part of her remained tethered to its ancient dread. The car radio crackled suddenly, static filling the silence before a faint melody emerged, an old folk tune that seemed to echo from another time, another place. It was disjointed, like a signal struggling to break through a veil of interference. Nell's heart skipped. She reached to turn it off, but paused as the song wove its melancholy thread through the night air. It was a lullaby for the lost, for the forgotten souls swallowed by the forest's hungry shadows. Her thoughts drifted to Tommy, her brother, whose disappearance had sparked this harrowing journey. The journal fragments she'd found, scribbled in his hurried hand, spoke of fear and fascination, of glimpses beyond the veil. Had he truly understood the danger lurking beneath the trees, or had he been consumed by the same darkness that now haunted Nell's every step? The miles slipped away beneath the tires, but the forest's whispers followed, a persistent susurration at the edge of her consciousness. She caught herself turning her head, as though expecting to see a shadow flit across the rear window, or a pair of burning coal eyes watching from the roadside. There was nothing but the empty road and the hum of her engine. Still, the unease gnawed at her, a reminder that the primordial shade was not merely a creature of legend or nightmare, it was a force woven into the very soil. The trees and the stories told in hushed tones around flickering campfires. The Jersey Devil was but a mask, a feeble myth to veil the true terror that thrived beneath the pines. Later, in the solitude of her Philadelphia apartment, the silence was thick and suffocating. The windows rattled softly in the night breeze, carrying with it a faint rustling that seemed almost unnatural. Nell sat at her desk, the journal open before her, pages filled with the tangled threads of her investigation. She traced a finger over the faded ink, feeling the weight of the past pressing down. Outside, The city pulsed with indifferent life, a stark contrast to the ancient wilderness she had left behind. Yet, the whispers had not ceased. They murmured in the shadows, in the silence between heartbeats, a reminder that some darknesses are eternal. Nell leaned back, eyes heavy but alert. The forest's voice was a haunting melody she could neither forget nor fully understand. The lines between myth and reality had blurred irrevocably, and though she had escaped the pines physically, the shadows had taken root within her. As dawn threatened the horizon, Nell's thoughts swirled with questions unanswered and fears unspoken. Had she truly survived, or merely been drawn deeper into the forest's endless night? The whispers never end, and neither, it seemed, did the darkness. Outside, the wind stirred the trees once more, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible sigh of promise that the Pine Barrens would keep their secrets, and that the primordial shade would wait patiently for the next soul brave or foolish enough to listen. And somewhere, deep beneath the earth, the ancient evil pulsed, awakening anew with the first light. "You never really leave," Mabel had said, her voice a rasp like dry leaves scraping stone. Nell's mind echoed with those words now as the city's noise faded into a distant hum. The forest's whispers were inside her, a dark lullaby that would haunt her dreams and waking hours alike. She closed the journal, the pages rustling softly, and stared out the window. The night was quiet, but she knew better. The shadows were watching, waiting, and the story was far from over.